Welcome to Mystery Theater at 7. My name is Lisa Long. The story that I bring you today is called Innocence. It is about someone who helps a 6-year-old little girl find her way out of a room that she's been trapped in for 11 years. Chapter 5, The Key. Faith walked up, took it, and started examining it. Boy, that looks good. Now we've just got to find the key. Faith stood almost in the middle of the room and looked around. If I were a key, where would I be hiding? She paused. Okay, you check over there, I'll check over here. If we don't find it, then we'll check the trunk. Innocence softly said, okay. They both looked around. Innocence said, I don't see it. While looking under the bed, Faith said, nothing here either. Okay, let's check the trunk. They went over to the trunk. She felt around in the trunk. As she shook her head, she said, it's not here. Then, as she was looking into the eyes of Innocence, she felt the damp cloth. She stopped. As if in slow motion, she pulled it out, looked at it, stood, looked down at the puzzle, and looked up at the clock. Then gradually looked around the room. Her eyes stopped on the doll. She took a deep breath in with a look of realization on her face. She gasped, and turned to Innocence. I know where I am. Chapter 6, The Lock. Innocence stood beside her. You do know where you are? Yes. While staring at the doll, she slowly said, the lock. Then with revelation in her voice, she said, I completely forgot. I put the lock on the door. In that moment, the lock became so clean that it looked new. The word that Innocence struggled to read on the bottom of the lock was easily visible. Also, the cloth that was once damp had become dry. Faith walked over to the makeshift bed and said in a sad and affirmative way, we can't and won't leave without the key. Innocence walked over to her. I know that you don't want to leave her, but if I don't take care of her, who will? God will, child. What if she gets scared? Does she believe that Jesus is the Son of God? Yes, she's been baptized. Innocence looked into those big, beautiful eyes of faith and said with great compassion, then she'll never be alone. You did such a great job. Everyone is proud of you. Faith looked down at the floor. Maybe she wants you to go home and get some rest. Why don't you ask her? Continued Innocence. Faith nodded her head and whispered, okay. She turned and said, Hadassah, the key which has the word permission written on it appeared in the sick doll's hands. Faith took a deep sigh. With joy and sorrow, she took the key and said, thank you. I'm leaving you in God's hands. She turned back to Innocence. Innocence extended her hand. Faith took it, and they walked to the door. She put the key in the lock. Then a flash of light appeared, and the lock, the key, the blue cloth, and the 2 chairs all disappeared into the light. The hand of Faith changed from a 6-year-old's hand to one of a 17-year-old. The 17-year-old Faith remained standing beside Innocence. With tears in her eyes, Faith said, I don't think that I can do this. Yes, you can, because you won't be doing it alone. Remember, I can do all things. Faith finished, through Christ who strengthens me. With tears in her eyes, Innocence said, yes, Faith, you can do this. Faith looked down and said, I can do this. She looked up at Innocence. With a flash of light, the clock above the door began to tick. The door and the makeshift bed that the doll was sleeping on disappeared into the light. Chapter 7, A Step Back in Time. They were in a room that resembled a hospital room. However, the remaining elements from the previous room were still there. Hadassah was in the hospital bed. Faith walked over and stood beside her, and Innocence followed. "Hey, Mama, I can finally do this. It's taken 11 years, but better late than never, right?" She smiled. "I've come to say goodbye." This was one of the hardest things that she started to cry, that I've ever had to do. It's something that I have to do. It's time for me to leave the hospital. She paused. "When you got sick, I did the best job that I could to take care of you. I remember that night in your room before you went to the hospital and how sick you looked. Do you remember that night when I put the infamous club cloth on your head and said, 'I promise that I won't leave you'? When we got to the hospital, they wouldn't let me be with you. All I could do was wait. Someone said, 'Faith, if you won't leave, honey, work on this to occupy your time.' And she gave me this puzzle. I waited. Hadassah waited too. I told her to wait until you got better. I worked on the puzzle and she lay down. She laid on the bed that I made for myself. I made it out of a cushioned table and 2 of the 4 chairs that were around the table where the puzzle sat. I waited and she waited. I waited and waited and waited for you to get better." She cried. "You never did." After a while, someone walked over and in a very sad voice said, "Faith, it's time to go." I told her that I promised that I wouldn't leave you. As I looked up at the clock, which read 12:25, I told the person again that I promised. I don't think that I was heard because the doll was picked up and then I was scooped up. Then we left. I still had the last puzzle piece in my hand when I was being taken away. I was so scared for you. I didn't want you to be alone, Mama. I'll always cherish our memories. Do you remember when we were moving that time? The moving truck was in the driveway. I was pulling the trunk to it. You said, "Faith, we don't have room for that." I said, "I've already put everything in there. I have to take it. It is my trunk. It contains all of my things. It is who I am." Then one of the movers said, "Miss, does it go or not?" You nodded and said, "Yes, it's who she is." At that moment, I knew for sure that I loved you. However, I think the best day of my life was that Saturday when I was 5 and the club meeting had to be canceled. Do you remember? We spent the day together. You felt so bad because you had accidentally washed the cloth. You were in the kitchen and I walked in and said, "The club meeting is about to start. I can't find the cloth." You asked, Where was it?" I said, "On my bed." You said, "With those other clothes?" I said, "Yes." You said, "I thought that you wanted me to wash those clothes." I said, "No." Mom, you know the rules. You know the rules. Blue cloth. And as I pointed to my blue shirt. You looked me in the eyes and said, "Faith, I'm sorry. It's being washed right now." I said, "Okay. The meeting will be The meeting will be canceled. The club will be crushed, but we will survive." I walked outside and canceled the meeting. When I came back inside, you came to me and said, "I'm sorry about crushing the club. Let me make it up to you." So, um, what if we name this day Faith Day? So wherever you want to go and whatever you want to do, that's what we do, provided that is within reason. I said, really? I have my own day. You laughed and said, yes, honey. I didn't really know what within reason meant. However, I figured that it couldn't be a bad thing. I love those days, Mama. Oh, I miss Faith days so much sometimes. I miss you so much sometimes. Thank you for those days. Faith paused and said, thank you. I know that it's okay for me to leave now. She gulped and said, goodbye, Mama. I love you. Goodbye. And as she said goodbye, the unfinished puzzle became finished, all but the missing centerpiece. The table that it was sitting on, the doll, the hospital bed, and the clock that seemed to stay suspended at 12:25 that had just begun to tick as she entered this room, disappeared into the light. Faith turned to Innocence. Innocence said, are you ready, Faith? Faith nodded her head and said yes. They started to walk out of the dimly lit world. Then suddenly Faith stopped dead in her tracks, and while looking down said, no. Chapter 8, Dim Light. Faith and Innocence are stopped. Faith was looking at the floor. Then that hidden dim light in the trunk of tomorrow pulsated. It turned into the missing piece of the puzzle. It illuminated everything else until the entire trunk was light-filled. As she raised her head in slow motion, light beamed from the trunk of tomorrow. She was smiling, and the once dark room was empty and was as light as day. Both Innocence and Faith turned around to see the 6-year-old Faith, beautifully dressed, well rested, and holding the last piece of the puzzle in her hand. The 6-year-old smiled and looked up to see her mother, who was coming down this invisible stairway of clouds from heaven. Her mother had the doll. She gave her to the 6-year-old and hugged her. The 6-year-old yells with joy, Esther. The 17-year-old and Innocence stood at a distance and watched. As Faith's mom picked the 6-year-old up, she looked over to the 17-year-old, waved, and mouthed, gosh, I can't say it, whatever, the words, I love you too. While beaming with joy, the 17-year-old turned to Innocence and said, Mama's home. Innocence smiled and said, I know. With a big smile, Faith said, and so am I. The 17-year-old and Innocence hugged. Innocence looked to see the 6-year-old. She was holding Esther and the puzzle in her left hand. She was holding Esther and the puzzle piece in her left hand. She was waving with her right hand. She yelled as she was being carried into heaven. Thank you for coming to get me, Innocence. Innocence smiled through her tears and whispered, it's why I was born. With that final piece in hand, the 6-year-old was overjoyed and had tears streaming, yelled out one final thing. She's well now, Innocence. She's well now. The ebook version of Well Now, Innocence is available for $4.95 at the website www.onesimpledownload.com. That's the number 1 and then simpledownload.com. Thank you.